everyone, it's Alice, and today I thought we could have a little chat about this year's Women's Prize for Fiction. So if you follow the prize, you'll know that the Longlist was announced last week, and today I thought we could just go through the list and take a look at what's on there and what looks most interesting. The Women's Prize is like the only literary prize that I pay any sort of attention to, and I try to make a video on it every year, and some years I've read loads of the books, some years I haven't. This year I actually haven't read any of the books on the list, and I actually haven't heard of a lot of them either. Like, a lot of them are totally new to me, and that's very exciting because I always feel like I discover a lot of new interesting books on this list. Now, the long list consists of 16 books, and then on the 27th of April we get the short list, which will have 6 books on it, I believe, and then I think on the 15th of June we will find out who has won the whole shebang, which is very exciting. Anyways, let's get onto the list and take a look at what's on there and take a look at what looks good. First, we have Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Coopersmith. And this one I haven't really heard anything about, but I do feel like I've seen the cover somewhere. It says it brings to life a century of Vietnam's history and folklore, and it's about 2 women, I believe, who go missing decades apart. One goes missing in the 80s, and one goes missing in 2011, and their lives are linked somehow. There's also something about a young boy being sent to boarding school, there's something about some Frenchmen starting a business, and something about some people investigating these strange occurrences at a farmhouse. And it says it's part puzzle, part revenge story, and part ghost story. To me, this sounds both epic and also like it's just a lot. And reading the blurb makes me a little bit unsure whether or not I want to read it. Like, there are elements of it that make me think I'm gonna like it, but then it just feels like there's a lot going on in it and maybe it'll be a little bit too much for me, so I'm a little on the fence with this one, whether I want to read it or not. Secondly, we have got Careless by Kirsty Capes, and to be honest, the synopsis of this is pretty scarce. It's not giving us a lot, but it says it's about this woman who finds out that she's pregnant, and I get the feeling that she's quite young, and she feels like she can't tell anyone. Like, she can't tell her social worker, she can't tell her foster mother, she can't really tell anyone because she feels like love never comes without conditions. I'm sure this could be great, but for me personally, I'm just not that interested in it. I tried looking up some reviews for it to see if I could find out more about what it's about, and it just doesn't seem like it's the kind of book that I'm really interested in reading. So for me, I'm probably gonna pass on this one. The third book on the list does stand out to me a little bit more though. It's Creatures of Passage by Marova Yejide, and this is a fantasy novel, which I feel like is quite rare to see on this prize, but maybe it leans more like magical realism because it does seem like it's set in our world, but it just has like fantasy elements in it. And it seems to be about this woman, I think, who has lost her twin brother, and she tries to like drown her sorrows in alcohol, and I think she drives a taxi that's haunted. And then there's something about her like nephew or something that keeps being drawn to this river where the brother actually drowned, and he is talking to someone that he refers to as the river man, who I'm assuming is a ghost. I think this sounds quite interesting. I generally quite like the kind of fantasy where it's set in our world, but there are like added elements to it, like whether it's magical or like supernatural, and I think it sounds interesting. But I did read some reviews for this that said that this book was quite confusing, which I don't love, but I am intrigued by this. I am. Next, we have got Flamingo by Rachel Elliott, and this has a great cover. I feel like I've seen this somewhere, but I don't know where, but it's quite a vibrant cover, so it makes sense that I would have noticed it. The story in here says it's all about love, homelessness, and learning to be fearless. And it's about these 2 families who come together one summer, and it's all great, but then one of them like leaves or something, and that like breaks everything apart. And then I think we meet all of these people later in life as they come back together or something like that. This sounds a little bit like some other books that I've read and enjoyed, like Little Fires Everywhere and Ask Again Yes. And because of that, I'm definitely adding this to my TBR, just in case it's anything like those books, because I loved both of those. So there's obviously something about stories like these that I really like. Then we have got another really interesting looking book. It's Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. And this is about this woman who grows up in Montana alongside her brother, and I think they're raised by their uncle. And then she falls in love with flying for whatever reason. And she drops out of school and does whatever she can to fulfill her dream of circumnavigating the globe by flying over both the North and the South Pole. But then I think the person she meets who's gonna like help her with this is kind of shady, so there's obviously like something else going on as well. This is one of those books that has like dual timelines, so one set in the past and one set more in the present day. And although the present day perspective doesn't intrigue me as much, the whole woman flying an airplane thing is enough for me. Then we have got a book that seems quite dark. It's Remote Sympathy by Catherine Chidgey. And this is about this woman who moves away from Munich with her family, and it seems like she doesn't really want to go, but then she gets to this new place and she finds out that this house is like super lovely and all of the finest things are at her disposal. The only slight problem is that the house is really close to this concentration camp, and also her husband is an SS officer who has been charged with the job of camp administrator. This sounds really jarring, obviously, but also quite interesting, and the blurb says something about how something happens to sort of challenge the wife's obliviousness to this whole situation, which does sound interesting, and a lot of the reviews are really glowing. But I am a little bit on the fence with this for whatever reason, so I think maybe I'll see if it makes it to the shortlist or not. Next on the list, there is Salt Lick by Lulu Allison. And again, I'm a little bit on the fence about this one because it says it's dystopian fiction, which is one of my favorite genres, but then it also says it's like speculative, which I feel like I don't always get on with, so I don't really know about this one. It seems to be set in a world where everyone is basically moved into big cities because there's no work anywhere else, and so the wild has started taking over the countryside again, and we meet this woman who lost her mother in a terrorist attack or something like that, and she wants to find out what actually happened. So she goes to visit the person who is in prison for murdering her mother, but then that leads her somehow like to leave the city and go into the countryside or something like that. And then there's also something about like, I feel like I read something about all white like communes, which sounds really sketchy, and there's like a boy on the run. And it sounds interesting, but again, if it's one of those books that's kind of like genre bending, I'm probably not that into it. I think maybe what I'll do for this one is that I will try to find it in a bookshop and try to read like the first 10-15 pages, because I feel like you can usually tell what kind of book it's gonna be when you just read the first bit. So maybe I'll try to do that, and then if I like it, I will give it a go. Then we have got Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, and I actually quite like this cover. I don't really know why, but it's doing something. And the story in here is about a woman who I think is in her early 40s, and she's a writer, and she seems a little bit depressed, even though everyone keeps telling her how lucky she is and how lucky she is to have her husband who just loves her so much. But then I think the husband leaves for some reason, and I'm assuming there's some sort of like life crisis. One of the reasons I'm interested in this is that I feel like it's kind of hard to find books about women in their late 30s and early 40s, so that really intrigues me, and that I do love a good book about a life crisis, probably because internally I have them all the time, so I'm definitely interested in this one. Next, we have The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Oseki, and this is an author that I am sort of familiar with. I haven't read any of her books, but I've heard a lot about her and a lot of praise for her other book that I can't remember the title of, but it's like really popular. And this one sounds really interesting. It's about this 14-year-old boy who loses his father, I believe, and he starts hearing like objects speaking to him. So he starts hearing voices, and that's obviously quite distressing. And then I think like at some point he finds like refuge in a library of all places. I think that sounds like kind of a weird book, but it also just sounds really interesting. Like the premise sounds really good, and it says it's a story about loss and growing up and how we humans relate to things, and all of it sounds very interesting. It is a little bit of a chunkier book though, so I feel like I'm gonna add it to my TBR, but it might take me a while to get to. Then on the list we have The Bread the Devil Need by Lisa Allen Agostini. And this is again a book about a woman in her 40s, so maybe these books are not so difficult to find after all. Maybe it's just me who like can't find them for whatever reason. But it's about this woman who runs her own boutique, and it's going great, but then she also spends a lot of time covering up the bruises left by her abusive partner. And I think what happens in the beginning of the book is that she witnesses a murder, and it's really brutal, and it makes her question her whole life situation. This says it's engrossing and atmospheric and has a strong feminist message, and I'm totally up for that. And I also do really like the cover of this one, so I'm definitely interested in it. Another great cover we've got is The Exhibitionist by Charlotte Mendelson, and this is one of those books that I feel like sounds interesting, but I also don't quite know. The story is about this family who gathers for a weekend. Like, the father of the family is an artist, and he's putting up this like artist exhibition or something like that, and he wants all of his children to come back home, so his 3 children come back home. And then there's also the wife, who is also an artist, but she's like put her career to the side to be a wife and a mother, but then maybe she doesn't want to do that anymore. I find stories about family dynamics quite interesting, and then I also read that there was something about like secrets in here, but for some reason I'm not as like intrigued by it as I thought I would be, so I think we'll have to see about this one. Next, we have The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton. And this is a novel about this iconic rock duo. It's set in the 70s and it's all about their sensational breakup and all of the dark secrets that come out when they reunite decades later for their like one final last tour. Now, to be honest, I'm just not interested in this one because there's something about books about like bands and music that just don't appeal to me for some reason. Like, you'd think that rock and roll and that kind of lifestyle would be really enticing to read about, but it just doesn't do anything for me, so I think this is gonna have to be a pass. A book that I'm definitely not gonna pass on though is The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. And this is the one book from this list that I have actually like held in my hands in a bookshop about to buy it, and that I didn't because I'm trying to not buy that many books, and so I put it back. But now that it's on the long list, I feel like it gives me a good excuse to go back and get the book. The story in here is about 2 teenagers who live on this island, and they like come together and fall in love, I'm pretty sure, and they keep meeting at this tavern, which is the only safe place for them to meet because they come from different religions, and that causes quite a lot of problems. And then I think war breaks out and they vanish. Like, I feel like the blurb said they vanish. I don't know if they vanish together or they like vanish separately. I have no idea, and to be honest, I don't really even care what this book is about because it's Elif Shafak and I want to read it. I want to read more of her work because I really like what I've read from her already, and so I'm really excited about this one. Then we have got The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller, and this is about a happily married woman in her 50s who wakes up at their like summer house, which I think is called the Paper Palace, and the morning that we meet her, things are a little bit different than usual because the night before she had a bit of a tumble in the dark with one of her oldest friends, all the while their spouses were elsewhere. And I'm assuming that causes a little bit of drama. I think this is the sort of story where the main character is at like a crossroads in her life and she has to make a decision on where to go next, which does sound interesting, but I'm not like totally convinced that I want to read this book, so I'm interested in it, but I think maybe I'll wait a little bit and see if maybe it makes it to the short list. We're almost at the end now. Second to last, we have The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, and I am for sure gonna read this book because there's a haunted bookshop in it, so obviously. It's about this woman who I think lands a job at this bookshop after having been incarcerated for a while, and she has to solve the mystery of who is haunting this bookshop, and I think the ghost that's haunting it is like an old customer. And I just think that sounds really interesting and also kind of funny because I think anyone who works in retail or who has worked in retail can understand the actual nightmare of having a customer die and they still come back to bother you. I just think this sounds really great, and I've heard that the writing is excellent. So this is going straight on my TBR. Now lastly, we have got This One Sky Day by Leonie Ross. And with this one, I don't really know because it's really hard to find a blurb that actually tells you that much. Like, it says it's set in this like magical world where these people have all of these different magical abilities, and it's like a story of star-crossed lovers, but I don't really understand what any of that means. This one is like a maybe for me. I do really like the cover, which helps a lot, but I think maybe I'll wait until I see some other people's like reviews, or if it makes it to the short list, maybe I'll take another look at it. That was the whole list, and I know that was a lot of books, but if I've made my notes correctly, there are 7 books on this list that I'm definitely interested in and that I'm gonna add to my TBR. There are another 7 that I'm interested in, but I'm a little bit more unsure about, so they're more in the maybe category. And then there are 2 books that I'm just not that interested in, so I'm probably gonna pass on them. Now, I never really stress about getting to the books on the long list or the short list or really the winner, to be honest, and I'm just gonna get these books when I feel like it. And like I mentioned, I'm trying to not buy so many books all the time these days, and so I'm not gonna rush out to get all of these like I maybe would have done in previous years. I'll just like add them to the list and I will read them whenever. I do feel like it's a very interesting list this year though, and there were a lot of books that I hadn't heard of or really seen, which is interesting. That's quite uncommon. Like, usually I will have heard of or at least seen a lot of the books on the list, and this year I feel like almost all of them were new to me, so that's interesting. And I also feel like a lot of the books this year are on the longer side. Like, there are no short books on the list, which is, it's just interesting. Now, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books already though, and what you thought, or what books you are adding to your TBR and which ones you're most interested in. Also, if you have any predictions for which books you think are gonna make it to the shortlist, I would love to hear about it. Or if you think you know which book is gonna win, do tell me all about it in the comments and we can have a little chat about it. And I think that's gonna be it for me today. As usual, links to my Patreon and other social media will be in the description if you're interested, and I will see you soon. Bye!